Um, so as, oh, that's the wrong button. There we go. So my name is Mark Rashan. Thank you again for the introduction. My role, I'm a senior solutions architect. So when I introduce myself to customers, I'm here to be a dedicated cloud nerd for anyone that I'm working with. And just so we have a feel for the room here, who do we have? We have project managers. If you're a project manager, can you raise your hand? A little bit. Any developers? Yeah. C-suite. Uh, there we go. All right. So um, kind of our role. So I'm based out of Los Alamos, as well as my account manager Ben Walls is out of Albuquerque. The two of us, we cover New Mexico as a state for state and local government customers. So this is part of Amazon's investment here in the state of New Mexico. I know a lot of you have seen the giant notch on the West Mesa Vernu distribution center for Amazon.com. We're not related to that building, but we are here to be really partners and solutions providers for you all here in the state. Um, so today, I kind of want to talk a little bit about if you haven't done a cloud migration project, what's really the starting point? Why are we doing this? How do we get to a successful outcome? And this is going to be a little bit higher level. It's not going to be a down in the weeds. We're talking about a specific service and specific nuts and bolts of something. It's meant to be a larger think piece about any cloud provider, not just AWS. What should your teams be thinking about? What should your teams be doing in order to get ready for that transition to a production in a cloud provider? So starting off, what are some of the reasons that we see customers coming to AWS saying, we can't do this on-prem or we want to do this in the cloud? Why does that change start to happen? A lot of times, different teams and companies want to look at, hey, we want our staff to get out of the heavy, patching, undifferentiated heavy lifting kind of stuff where you're taking your database people and making them do patching instead of focusing on database problems. You're taking your analytics folks and making them do patching instead of analytics problems. And even your new staff, the college kid you hire to rack and stack hard drives when the red light blinks, you probably have some turnover when they get tired of just being a server monkey. They want to do something more with their career. So we see a lot of trends around data centers that are either going away, data centers that are being hard to maintain, staff that you want to take better advantage of and really empower them to make business changes in your environment, not just code changes or maintenance type changes. Certainly end of life, we get a lot of people who are like, hey, we're going to be out of our data center in 6 months. How can you help us? And we're like, well, we probably should have talked 4 to 6 months prior, but it's a chance to have that conversation, a chance to look at doing business differently. If you're having to disrupt things, that's the right time to think about a shift to the cloud. Similarly, we also have a lot of teams approach us when they're looking to shave costs. You can absolutely make the cloud more expensive than on-prem if you do it wrong. Like, I'm here at AWS and I will say that to you. The right architecture makes the right outcome happen. But if you move into it in a smart way, you can see significant cost savings. And we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. Digital transformation, touched on that. And then similarly, if you have managers that say, I want to do more analytics. I keep hearing about this machine learning thing and how it's going to change my world. How do we do that here? That's another significant driver for why people are adopting cloud, because it's easier to do a lot of those types of activities rather than doing all of that on-prem. I was talking about the benefits a little bit. Right off the bat, if you're in an infrastructure organization, Nucleus Research and IDC, hopefully everyone will be getting a copy of these slides afterwards if you'd like to read the white papers. People, the large swath of people that companies get surveyed by these analytics firms, they're seeing 31% reduction in infrastructure costs when people migrate to the cloud. It says it's green on here. Push it one more time.
Oh no, if it's green, you're good. It just went off. I can't see it.
There we go. Now it's back green.
Yeah, I'll gain you up a little bit.
Okay. Okay, sure. Hopefully that's a little better. So see a significant cost savings when they move to the cloud with the right infrastructure changes as you're doing that migration. Similar boosts in productivity, the number of security incidents can actually go down. Our CIA sponsor of our classified regions actually said on the weakest day, the cloud is still stronger than our security posture on-prem. And for me, I actually started at Los Alamos and Boeing Defense doing classified cloud stuff, and then finally came down to working in a public setting with the cloud. So I can attest to that. There's some really powerful security tools you can take advantage of without spending a lot of development cycles to do so. If you have environmental targets to hit, AWS, we're going to be completely renewable powered by 2030. Some organizations find that important. If you're one of them, that's certainly a reason to move. So the journey itself, how do you get to the cloud with your applications? Obviously, it starts with having to know what you have. Show of hands, how many of you can say with a high degree of certainty, like 90+% certainty, that you know all of the applications running in your team's environments? Either. Team, yes. A couple of other hands saying yes, but that wasn't everyone in the room. So certainly starting with a discovery of what's there, assessing that and then determining what the right path is the starting point. And then this is going to kind of draw out a subway map. At the tail end, obviously, you validate what you've put in place, you transition from whatever you're doing today, and then you go to production. To fill that in, this is where you get to your seven different options you can really choose from. First up, you relocate your stuff. If you're a VMware shop, you can do VMware Cloud. ESXi on-prem to a hypervisor in AWS. There's other VMware type cloud products with our competitors as well, but you can just move it. If you're containerized today, it gets really easy to do that as well with Docker or Kubernetes. You figure out what the configuration dials need to be in the cloud, you vMotion it or Docker, move the Docker files over, and you're good to go. What we tend to see is more teams are approaching this, especially if they're new to cloud as a whole, to do a lift and shift. Rehosting, it's a totally valid pattern to get you into a cloud environment, but the problem is this tends to be more expensive. If you're not optimizing for it, you're just picking it up from here, moving it over here, you're not picking anything that's going to save you any kind of money. So those cost savings can either be negligible or you can make it more expensive for yourself than you anticipated. And rehosting itself has two main paths. If you're a team that's really small and you've done all of your application development yourself and you manage your entire application or environment yourselves, they say, hey, we'll just manually install it in the cloud. You can do that. That'll take you longer likely because you're learning a new skill set while you're having to do the work as well. We also have a path where you can choose to automate that. We'll touch on a whole bunch of tools that both AWS provides and our partners provide, but instead of having somebody sitting watching a loading bar of something moving into a file share or moving into a cloud environment, grab a tool, grab all your VMs at once, package them, send them. Lower that barrier to entry for your team so they can focus on learning the differences between operating on-prem and in the cloud. That'll put you in a slightly better position to then finish the rest of your migration, which you still have to do once stuff's installed. A lot of times I encourage, as a solutions architect, I'm here to help our customers look around corners, and I encourage a little bit of replatforming. If you're running a file share today, Windows SMB share or a CIFS share or something like that, let's think about not running a Windows VM or a Linux VM to share out a disk. Let's look at moving to a managed file share service. Get out of that mode of one more thing to patch and do compliance reports on and things like that. If you're in the database field, you can choose to continue running Oracle or MySQL or Microsoft SQL on a VM. Totally valid. It'll still get you over to production. But if you have that chance to move things anyways, why not stop and think about moving to a managed database service? For AWS, we call it Relational Database Service, RDS. You start working at your database from the tables up. You don't have to do the underlying host patching and compliance, and the underlying database engine patching and compliance. That gets handled for you, so you get to focus back on where your team's real value add is, not the maintenance stuff. Hire them and use them for the technologists that they want to be, most likely. So replatforming, it takes a whole list of things to think about, but a lot of times you'll get closer to cloud native architecture or cloud friendly architecture if you stop to think about it. Similarly, if you're using COTS products, you didn't write everything from scratch, there's a chance to repurchase. Now, one of the projects I'm working on with one of our customers here in the state, they use Highland, which is a document database, and you can install that on EC2, which is our virtual machine service, and run it like a VM you do on-prem today, but they offer a cloud version. So it's more cost effective, it's more performance efficient, and you don't have to do the maintenance on it. So repurchasing, it's a chance to take a look at, is there someone that's already done the homework to move their stuff to the cloud, and then you just get to use it. Sometimes it's the right call, sometimes it's not. So that's why it's one of the options on this list. And lastly, this is the one that everyone seems to get stuck on when you talk about a cloud transition. They're like, oh, the sky is falling, we're gonna have to rewrite our entire application, and it takes a complete redesign to do it. And some applications it does. Sometimes that is the right call, because when you sit down, and we'll talk about some of the approaches to get ready for this, you sit down, you do your total cost analysis, you do your business case, and sometimes just doing a lift and shift, you're gonna blow your budget in 6 months with some architectures in terms of operating costs. And sometimes it's the right approach to sit there and say, let's take our .NET application, put it in a container with an automation tool. Let's do something to re-architect that into a microservices pattern, or approach the problem with like a strangler pattern, where you start with your monolithic application, you take, well, we can take this piece off the edge and this piece off the edge, and start approaching a more cloud native application. And yes, that has to follow the rest of your life cycle, your application life cycle, development cycle, and then doing the software building of it. But the net result is you're kind of cloud native if you've done that re-engineering, rewrite of your application. For those of you counting, yes, that was only 5 paths to healthy cloud migration. Sometimes the right call is not to migrate. If you're running Solaris 7, or you're running OS2 Warp, or you're running something really ancient, or something that has to be tied to some physical piece of hardware with some special interconnect on-prem, don't move it. You're going to cause yourselves more business headaches than it is to put it on a shelf, say, right now we're not doing anything with it, and move on. Similarly, it's also a good chance to retire things. If you have a time card management reporting system, and you have a time card system that has a button to export a PDF, well, wait a minute, maybe those two are the same thing or close enough where you can make a tweak to your business process and just get rid of half of that. So this is kind of the overarching subway map of how do you get to production in a cloud environment. And there's a lot of business drivers to why you'd want to modernize your legacy stuff. We're actually working with several people that are doing mainframe migrations. So if you have a mainframe running COBOL stuff, you can move that to the cloud. We have a lot of partners that actually specialize in that, and you can even do serverless COBOL if you want. So there's business drivers for all of these. People come and talk to AWS like, well, we're not only a Linux shop, we have Windows. In terms of Microsoft, we run 2 times the amount of Microsoft Server than even Azure does. So there's lots of opportunities to get cost savings, performance savings, leverage someone else's expertise that's done this before and had a successful outcome, in order to bring those dollars and bring those cycles back to your team and do something useful that you want to do with it, instead of just maintaining more infrastructure today. Generally, we see the kind of getting ready, or thinking about it, getting ready, and then the doing falling into 3 phases of assess, mobilize, and migrate. The assessment phase, that's the discovery. That was the left side of the subway map, where you have to make sure you understand what you're actually thinking about moving. And then it's also getting your teams ready. It's doing immersion days with people like myself that want to get all of you hands-on with our tools in a crash and burn environment at no cost, get comfortable, get learning, do some briefings, start to think about the problems. Then the mobilize is think about them in a little more detail. Once you know, hey, this is probably our short list of what can move reasonably easily, what should move from a cost perspective, dive into that business case. We have a number of different assessment tools, assessment teams that can come help you understand what should or shouldn't be in scope. I've had meetings with customers. I'm like, you should not be moving this. That's part of my role. I'm not on commission as a solutions architect. I'm here to make sure you have a successful outcome. And sometimes, you can make a great business case, say, yeah, this is a no-brainer. We're going to save 52%. But you have to do that analysis to figure out whether that's the case or not. You should not be just guessing at it. Similarly, compliance stuff changes when you move to the cloud. We operate on a shared responsibility model where if you're running HIPAA, HITRUST, CGIS data, or even, I don't know if we have any aerospace folks in the room, ITAR data. It's a little bit different than in your data center where you control everything. So there has to be a security conversation involved in that. Similarly, setting up a landing zone. How do you set up a secure environment to safeguard people from doing things to themselves that they should not be doing to themselves? That's all part of the getting ready. And then finally, you pick one of those subway paths on the previous chart, and then you do that migration. A lot of times that ends up just, hey, we're in production, we're good to go, check mark, next. Also, people take that as, well, hey, that went better than expected. That went faster or cheaper. Maybe we can squeeze another 10% price performance out of it, or we can squeeze another 20% performance out of it. So there's an application modernization path that once you're in the cloud, you can continue journeying on. I mentioned, we have a lot of tools and a lot of partners that'll help you do those types of migrations, all the way from the assessment phase, all the way through you're in operations and you want to measure it nicely. I will call out, a lot of these are multi-cloud. We at AWS understand that our competitors are out there and they serve to make us better by focusing on our products. But reality is nobody's picking just one cloud today. And so if you have a strong business case to move into a multi-cloud posture, it's worth taking a look at some of our partners and how they can help you prioritize what needs to go where. Because it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. Lastly, skills enablement is really important. It is, if everyone can think back to when we first started doing VMware, moving from everything's bare metal and all the lessons we had to learn the hard way about what can be virtualized, how do you virtualize it, the pain points of what do you mean that went down at 3 a.m., we just moved it yesterday, and it looked like it was fine. There's enablement and learning that has to go along with moving to the cloud. So for AWS, we offer a huge portfolio of training and certification. We just recently launched almost all of our security training for free, self-paced online. If you have a team of 10 or more, we can bring in a trainer to meet with you on-prem or as a specialty class for your organization. And then certifications. The same way certifications matter whether you're doing cybersecurity stuff. I saw the EC Council certified ethical hacker folks out in the hallway. We have similar certification tracks for AWS skill sets or AWS specific technology areas. Managed services are something to look at when you're considering enabling your entire team. Sometimes there's enough moving pieces you want to hand off, like, I just need someone to do my Windows patching for me. That's an option. Similarly, if you have a need for staff augmentation, but you don't want to bring in a giant partner that's going to be there for 6+ months, there's options of doing professional services. There are smoke jumpers that come in, help you set something up, leave artifacts behind, and they're out in 2 weeks. If you need those longer-term commitments or longer-term engagements, we have a fantastic set of partners. We've heard of MTX today. We also work with A&M and other local companies here in New Mexico to offer, either staff augmentation, managed services, or even just point like, hey, we need technical depth that we don't have. Help us with this project. So those are we love our partners. We love working with them because they help, ease a lot of pain and transition into a cloud environment because they've done them before. So it's a helping hand as you're starting to think about all the challenges you have to learn about firsthand. Maybe somebody's seen those and can walk you around some of the corners you'd walk into. On the left-hand side, support, enterprise support. If you're running enterprise stuff and it's in the expensive or very expensive per hour if it's bricked category, having enterprise support matters. A lot of people say, oh, it's optional. It's optional until you need it. So it's worth having that relationship ahead of time. I've seen a lot of projects where they try to go cheap on that, and then they have a Sev2 type of outage, and we'll scramble. We'll help meet you there as best we can, but it's better to be proactive about some of those types of things. And the last one, especially since we have a lot of smaller companies and smaller organizations at this conference, I wanted to point out AWS IQ. This is really our freelancer for hire, like an app store of freelancers is how I've heard it described as well, of people that have AWS certifications and have been able to prove things that they know how to do databases or they know how to do migrations or networking. If you need just some extra help on a project, that's an option as well. I was hoping to add in a slide here because it got published between when I had to send this deck in and when we're standing here today. So before we talk about New Jersey courts system, I want to talk about a real live New Mexico use case. We have Lawrence from the Education Retirement Board here, who's responsible for the pensions and the retirement plans of all of our state's educators. They actually went through a major application migration, and they were able to save 50% on their Oracle databases by moving to AWS. They were able to take that slight refactoring time and say, hey, now's the time to make some choices about, do we need enterprise Oracle? Do we need to manage the entire Oracle instance by ourselves, or can we move to a managed service? And the net result at the end of that project was they had a successful migration. Their applications are now running on AWS, and they were able to save 50% of their database costs, which if you've worked with Oracle licensing, that's a lot. That can be a lot of zeros there. So we do have success stories here to share in the state. I picked on New Jersey courts because this was at the peak of COVID, or at the start of the first peak of COVID, they had to push all of their court system virtual, like that, overnight. They had to not just continue performing court duties, but all of the administrative stuff in the back end. I think they had to, let me scroll down my notes here, make sure I'm getting the number right. They have 7 million cases per year that their New Jersey court system sees. And because of COVID restrictions, that number dropped to about 20 or 30 per week, which is just not gonna scale. You talk about judicial backup. They wanted to avoid that, and they're like, well, how do we take these on-prem systems that are locked on-prem that we can't turn into VPN-facing applications fast enough? Let's just move them to the cloud. And so in a span of about 3 weeks, they were able to move 40 key applications. And one in particular was the Judiciary Electronic Document Systems. This is any types of court records or in the courts type of handouts. They were able to move that in 2 days. And if you stop to think about this, this is not just some t-shirt website with no compliance. This is mostly CJIS data. This is very restrictive, has a lot of eyes on it. There is a chain of custody on most of it. And they were able to move all of those systems into AWS seamlessly. They took advantage of tools. They took advantage of partner expertise and AWS expertise to do this type of transition, and they were successful. As of today, they're taking the approach where they're still doing hybrid court type of engagements, and they foresee for about the next 2 years they're going to continue that model. That was the first half hour. I want to hear from you. What questions do you have for us at AWS? What types of, anything here that we talked about today? Do we do DB2? What was that? I don't believe so. I can check, but I haven't seen that one come up. Yeah, if you're trying to port application or databases over that we don't support natively, we do have tools like our database migration service or schema conversion tool that help you, take from and go to some type of change. But let's chat afterwards. I want to make sure that we get your question actually answered. Yes, if you're online, please do submit your questions into chat. We can read those out here today. Yes. Okay. So the question for people online was, what's the trade-offs between having a vendor manage their product for you as an offering versus installing it yourself and managing it yourself? The number one criteria that I've seen in the real world of people making that, essentially a make-buy decision or a reinstall buy decision, comes down to cost. Some people look at the sticker shock of, oh, I am trying to buy this cloud type of version from the company. I don't know if we can swing that in this next fiscal year. So it's worth considering as a future migration, but it's not necessarily right at that time. Outside just the pure financial aspect of that trade-off decision, it usually comes down to what your staff want to do. If something is just a dog of an application to maintain and it's old and the documentation's terrible, maybe it's time to move to something newer. I won't mention the partner. They have an on-prem business intelligence type product that focuses on forms and workflows, and the on-prem version, it's being sunsetted. It's kind of been turned into abandonware, and they're having that conversation of, well, we wouldn't have to rebuy the license if we moved it, but man, we hate that tool. We would love to get rid of it. So that kind of kickstarted the conversation. Even though there wasn't a cost driver for it, there was a productivity and kind of morale driver in this case to go make that change. There's a lot of different dimensions, in terms of what infrastructure would you have to spin up that has cost, that also has maintenance. We've talked a little bit, I just mentioned the morale and human factors piece. It's all case by case. Best thing to do is really start with that portfolio analysis. Even if it's dumped to a spreadsheet and highlight the rows of, we could probably rebuy this, and then go start doing a vendor evaluation, just like you would for any other on-prem product. Sure. No questions online so far. So I'll point out the giant QR code. Amazon, we're a data-driven company. If you liked our talk, if you want to give me feedback about how I did today, please feel free to take a picture of that and fill out your survey. It's kind of generic, so I'm not serving you food today, but feel free to rate the rest of the conference's food. Again, like going back to the very beginning, we're here to be your partners in whatever you choose to do. AWS, we've made the investment in the state. Yes, question.
Can you talk a little bit about your crash and burn?
Sure. So immersion days, I think that's what you're referring to. So immersion days are an engagement we can do, no cost, just have to schedule it from a timing standpoint, where I stand up a bunch of burner accounts for up to, I think, 35 people. It's better around 15 to 20, but we can come in and say, hey, let's do a Kubernetes immersion day. And if your team has never touched Kubernetes, it is kind of a self-paced lab with myself and probably a couple other solutions architects that either specialize in that area or, depending on the size of the class, are just an extra pair of hands to help out with it. And we go in there, we kind of walk through the lesson plan. You get to actually build and touch and break things in a Amazon account, AWS account that goes away after however many hours we set to have it go away. So it's no cost to you. It's a chance to get hands-on, make some mistakes, learn some things without impacting your data or a cost output from doing that in a real live account. There's a huge immersion day catalog we can pick from. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Saw an eyebrow raised. Any questions? No. All right, that went, I was hoping for more questions here at the end.
All right, I'll ask
Sure.
Looking at, right now, I have a data warehouse that I'm looking
Mhm.
And so it's time to evaluate what we do and how we do it.
Yeah.
What would be the approach that you would suggest looking at? We also, I mean, we have multiple data warehouses, and so I've had some that are in Microsoft SQL Server, I've had some that are in
Mhm.
Oracle, I've got core systems that are coming out of, everything.
Mhm.
So what would be kind of like your approach to come in and talk to us about what some of our options might be or how we might go about attacking this product or this issue? Because for so long, we've just been in that and so
Mhm.
this whole world of what AWS has to offer is not even something that, I know that they're letting me know.
Sure. So to repeat the question for people online, it sounds like there's a data warehouse with a lot of traditional relational database sources that feed into that warehouse. Where would you start in terms of understanding the project, understanding possible outcomes? Where do we start? If you were calling me as a first call about that type of project, I would say, let's do just an introduction, get your team introduced to the portfolio of both data warehouse type things, database type things, see, just so we're speaking the same language, get some training, get some immersion going, and then start to look at, before we throw technology at it, before we throw the parts cannon at it of, hey, you can buy all these things and do all these things, what does your future business roadmap look like? If you're running large data warehouses today, is it worth having an API conversation? How are you serving your data out to your customers? Is it all through ODBC type stuff, and you have to continue doing it that way because everyone's got legacy applications? Possibly, maybe that's the right outcome. Or maybe we talk about microservices. We talk about an API-driven data strategy. I actually did this with one of my Army customers previously, where I don't know if any of you know the Jeff Bezos API story. Early on in Amazon's history, there was an infamous memo that circulated around the company saying, from now on until the end of history, every service you build must be able to be externalized. It must have an API, and you must provide documentation how to use that API. You are not allowed to do database integrations, full stop. Have a nice day. And that was such a shock because it's like, but I can just hit the MySQL port and access the data that way. But what this really forced our company to do internally was to think about how we have to share data amongst teams. And we realized it was nutty to have somebody have to go understand a particular application schema before they could ask questions of it. So if you look at what's available, you can do GraphQL, you can do RESTful APIs to expose that data. So if you're talking about modernizing your data warehouse, maybe it's better to work backwards from what do your next iterations of your interactions with your other application owners look like, and is that the right time to bring in some innovation to that project? Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Any online? Nothing online. All right. Quiet bunch. Please do drop by our booth out in the hallway. We're right across from A&M directly, and right as the entrance is to the main ballroom. We'd love to come talk with you about your projects and hear about how we can help you be successful. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.